bookseller and gift seller here at the Booksmith. If you're familiar with our store, welcome back. And if it's your first time, welcome in. Some housekeeping before we begin. If you pre-ordered a book, it will be available for pickup at the back counter at the end of the event. If you'd like to purchase one or many, you can do that then as well. And just so you know, tonight's event is being live streamed on YouTube. Hello YouTube friends, from our iPad over here. We try to keep audience members out of frame as a rule, but just in case, if you don't want to be in the live stream, just don't walk in front of the iPad. Tonight we are here to celebrate the release of Writrix Volume Two, Rays of Light.
I'm not going to go anywhere.
A combination of poetry, prose, and personal essay, Writrix comes from the belief that when writers share their work, they change the world. From stories that detail the nuances of love and loss, to tales of addiction, to the struggles of grappling with technology, these women writers capture slices of life by exploring the simple and the complex. All of the authors here tonight have work featured in this book. We have a lot of authors this evening, so I'll keep introductions brief, but I'm just going to go through real quick. Leslie Brilliant is a poet, author, teacher, and writing whisperer, published in journals, magazines, and the anthologies Big City Mantra and Deliver Us. She offers writing courses, retreats, and private coaching. She hosts Writrix salons, monthly readings of original written work, and is the editor and publisher of Writrix. Laurel Carpenter is a part-time mermaid who spends her brief time on land writing about the past nostalgic moments and future calamities. During her time on land, she works at Pearl Consulting in New York City. Liz Linder is a photographer and writer based in Brookline, Massachusetts. Her work has been featured in Rolling Stone, the New York Times, NPR, and more. Corinna Rasikov is a writer and photographer living just above Cape Cod with her family. She specializes in family photography. And last but certainly not least, Rochelle Seltzer is a creative core coach, speaker, artist, and the author of Live Big, a manifesto for a creative life. She embarked on a creative writing adventure in 2022 and has not looked back. She lives in Brookline. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming all of our speakers this evening.
Hello and welcome. I'm Laurel Carpenter. My piece is called On Wings of Song, and you're getting to hear it before my mother. My dad moved us from Albany to a small Vermont town when I was 10. He worked at the local university, but most of our new neighbors worked at the IBM plant. The IBM kids ran in packs wearing green and white pom-pom hats, a company gift they donned on cold, snowy days while waiting for the school bus. It was a symbol the insiders wore so they could identify each other more easily. I wanted one of those hats so badly. In my perfectly logical 10-year-old mind, having one of those hats would make me more likable, would help me to fit in. But we were marked as flatlanders, a less than flattering term that native Vermonters used to describe people who were not born in their state. My thick plastic glasses fogged on winter mornings as I watched the Bergerons get on the bus, piling up the steps like adorable ducklings with bobbing pom-pom hats all in a row. But a pom-pom hat wasn't going to help me become less of a weirdo to them. It was around that time Mom announced that I should learn to play the violin. It was pre-decided in an era where it was unthinkable that kids could make their own choices. I wanted to play the flute, but Mom was a trained classical oboist with strong opinions about wind instruments. Everyone wants to be a flautist, Laurel. There are already too many flute players. You'll have a much better chance of getting into the youth orchestra if you play the violin. Violinists are useful. She had it all laid out for me. As Mom droned on about the virtues of being a violinist, I put down my fork, feeling the weight of the pot roast I'd eaten sitting heavily in my stomach, the smell of leftovers drifting through the air. I imagined Alice and Kelly and the other flautists I knew, sitting on stage in their monogrammed sweaters with their blonde hair shining in the overhead lights, my light slowly dimming as Mom declared my fate. The flute was such a pretty light instrument, suggesting graceful ballet dancers, mischievous fawns wandering through Narnia in search of Turkish delight, and fairies spinning their sparkly dust into the wind. All of the girls I knew who played the flute were as light and pretty as their instruments. I didn't want to be useful. I wanted to be popular, so kids like Stevie Blaufelt would stop punching me in the arm every day and invite me to their birthday parties instead. But Mom insisted I try it her way, so she took me to the school's musical instruments sale and bought me a violin. I started violin lessons with Elizabeth Langston, who conducted group classes for all the fourth graders, but Mom was dissatisfied with her standard issue music instruction of Do, Re, Mi, and Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. I'm going to find a better violin teacher for you, she said. because you're above that level already. And truthfully, I was bored with the lessons. That's when Mom hired Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Hoffman was elderly with thick black glasses. He yelled a lot during our lessons and forced me to play etudes, Vivaldi, and a piece called On Wings of Song that my mom claimed made her cry each time I played it. And every Christmas, she trotted me out like a trained monkey to play that same piece over and over again for my bored cousins. They rolled their eyes and choked down their laughter, but my mom was oblivious to their reactions. My mom came from a family of Russian emigres, and both she and her brother Sergei showed musical promise at a young age. Years later, I learned that our high school had found a busted-up cello for Sergei and an oboe for my mom because her family didn't have money to spend on instruments. A brand new musical instrument was something she would have cherished as a gift at 10 years old. But I didn't know how important it was to her back then, and even if I had, I didn't want a new violin. I'd rather have had a Sony Walkman instead. My cousins, who took annual family trips to various ski resorts around the country and played tennis, politely tolerated my sawing away every year. As much as I craved their attention, I didn't want to be seen as a musically talented nerd. They were the cool side of the family, well-dressed and great at sports, and we were the weird side who wore secondhand clothes and played classical music. And so began my rebellion against the violin. I'd avoid practicing, holding up in my room with headphones on, but somehow I managed to get better despite my weak efforts. You have a natural talent and almost perfect pitch, Mom explained. You have to keep going. And 2 years later, I auditioned for the statewide youth orchestra and was accepted into the summer orchestra camp program. The prospect of orchestra camp actually excited me, but only because I get to meet people from around New York City and would be away from home, away from our cliquish Vermont neighbors, away from my dad and his explosive temper that was often directed at me. Our first rehearsal at camp was on stage with the entire orchestra, the strings, the woodwinds, the brass instruments, the triangle, and the timpani. I was in the back of the second violins, in the very last chair, but I was there. The conductor, an irascible childhood mentor of my mom's from her Long Island hometown, frequently paused to yell at the orchestra, "No," or slower. He gesticulated wildly at us, his forehead vein popping. We started like an engine humming, revving up, gathering speed like a plane about to take off. As we burst into the Toreador theme from Carmen, I felt transported for the first time on the wings of the sound. So this was what Wings of Song really meant. The thrill of the takeoff was so long, so strong, that I almost forgot to play. This wasn't Twinkle Twinkle. It made me feel like I was part of something, an organism much larger than myself. At that moment, I was happy to be a violinist, happy to be useful, happy to be part of something so grand. When I cleaned out my parents' basement this past October after a flood that destroyed many of our belongings, I found letters from the friends I'd met that summer at camp. Jane wrote to me to share her city adventures. She visited her dad's office in Manhattan, and they'd gone to Fiorucci and the Canal Jean Company, but she lamented that everything was too expensive. Adrienne and Beth wrote me from Long Island to tell me how much they missed camp and wanted to return next year. These girls were the people I'd been seeking. They lived in communities where people played instruments, went to Broadway shows, and didn't have neighbors who mocked them for being cultured. It was that summer that I first understood that I could fit in. I just had to figure out where I belonged. So I made a plan to control my own fate, planning one day to escape that small Vermont town for a new life in New York City. And a decade later, that's exactly what I did. Thank you.
This piece is an excerpt from my entry in the anthology, which is called Excerpts from the Grief Diary. I'm going to start in the middle. He never talked about death. Even at 97, finally needing a wheelchair to go to the dining room, he had only talked about the future. A week before he died, having further declined and turned inward, he lifted his face toward me and declared that he wanted to go back to Paris. "Let's get you strong enough for the trip," I said gently. "Have a little more soup." He took another spoonful from the bowl that he had pushed away, swallowing carefully. Did he let himself think about how near he was to the end? I knew it was close. I didn't know how close. Or that my youngest sister would never see him again. I could not have predicted that she would be in a coma fighting for her own life the day he died. He had me on that last day, stroking his shoulder and talking to him quietly as he lay in a deep stupor. When he suddenly raised 2 fingers to his lips as though pondering a curious question, I smiled, knowing something was still going on inside. He had my middle sister that day too. We tag teamed, moving between Daddy and the ICU, where doctors grimly gave us updates on our other sister's deteriorating condition. Later that night, the call came. It was Daddy who had slipped away. In the last 5 months, our sister has pulled through. The house has been sold. Most of the contents accumulated over the course of their 70-year marriage have been given away, sold, sent to an auction house, and donated. Mom's art is stacked in every available space in my middle sister's studio, waiting to be sorted and gifted to family and friends. I have yet to finish going through boxes piled high in my front hall full of photos that will be saved and sent off to family members or tossed. I'm determined to go slow. No deadline. No pressure. I have time, and I'm savoring time to finally feel. And even as I sense a floodgate of emotion starting to open and know it will be hard, I welcome it. I welcome the tears. The heaving this morning, face dripping, hands twitching, was just the start. I need to let it come. I hear thunder and rain and say yes. The natural world is setting the scene. I turn on music, I feel suspended in a cinematic moment, and suddenly, a song I've never heard before catches my ear. 24 frames per second starts playing on Pandora. Crackly, energy beating rhythmically, I sway, move, shut my eyes, and feel it all pulse through me. Subtle voices infuse the melodic track with tone but no words. I will supply the words. It's my soundtrack now. 24 frames per second is the speed of a video with 24 distinct still images. At that speed, the images appear to be smoothly strung together. At that speed, there is no flicker. One image shown for every 2 frames of film. Running at 24 frames per second, 12 drawings per second. Each precious second holds 12 drawings, 12 images, 12 memories. I started making drawings yesterday, and I will make more today, more tomorrow. For now, they are color and feeling. I'll see what they become as I go. I'll create a suite of 12 drawings to express the soreness, the sadness, longing, sharp shards of grief. I need the words and the art. They're my tools now, tools to access all the feelings that finally have space to come up and out. They make the emotions visible as I capture and sit with them. The space that has been cramped with to-dos and urgencies for so long begs to be loosened, empty and flexible. I want to move softly, one slow breath at a time. In the quiet, each new round of sadness will have its space to rise when it is ready. And so it will go. Day 4. 24 frames per second keeps coming to mind. I want to choose 12 images to flash by in a single second, followed by 11 more sets of 12 images to tell the story of my grief in the space of 12 precious seconds. 1. From the mountain of photos waiting to be sorted, I will pick 12 shots showing me when little. I'm sure I'll find ample evidence of little Maid looking concerned, hoping that she's able to meet the implicit expectations of her parents and grandparents to be good enough, having no idea of what that really means. That worried face holding sadness that nobody ever asks what she wants, what she cares about, what she thinks. 2. I'll find pictures of me with Grandma, timidly looking up at her imperious face, an appendage she can show off and hand off to relatives on our trip to Europe, standing together in family portraits, in her store where she expected me to help. I grieve the voice that she silenced in me with her intimidation. I grieve the fear I suffered, knowing the deep disappointment she harbored because I bit my nails, wasn't pretty enough, and never measured up to countless expectations she didn't bother to articulate. 3. I'll search for smiling pictures of me at play and savor rare moments of freewheeling happiness as I grieve that so much of my childhood was lived so cautiously. 4. I'll choose pictures of gawky early adolescent and late adolescent me on the brink of adulthood with no idea what she could be or how she wanted to show up in the world or a belief that she might actually be smart, talented, or special. 5, I'll choose the picture of Grandpa's parents and sisters from Warsaw and grieve their horrible end, along with pictures of my grandfather, his eyes haunted in every shot. 6, I'll choose photos of my sisters and me laughing in the living room of the Marion Roadhouse and at family events and on vacations, and at my 20th anniversary that we turned into a second wedding. I will grieve that those easy, happy times together were lost decades back after my youngest sister started working in Daddy's business and moved back to Philadelphia from Boston. She became a family wrecking ball, and the damage she wrought is still an open wound, if a smaller wound, in our lives. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karina Rasnikoff, and I'm reading 2 pieces. The first is called The Robot. February 16th, 2042. It's so great that we have a robot in the house now. Everyone else had them for so long. The Talon family loved theirs, and Janice was always bragging about how it cleaned the toilets and floors, and that her house had never been tidier. My husband didn't want one, but then he didn't clean the toilets and floors. Janice said it also did construction, and I'd been waiting for an upstairs linen closet for 4 years. After I had the robot build the linen closet, I definitely have him build bookcases all over the house, like on every available wall. I'd even take pictures down to have more bookcases. Oh, to have a robot/handyman, it would be a dream. Really, it would. That's not what husbands are, sadly. You ask them to build you something, and 4 years later, you have a big hole in the wall at the top of the stairs, and tools living perpetually on the breakfast table, which I don't like eating at anyway. It's so cold in the winter. March 16th, 2042. The robot we got last month has a therapy program, and it's one of the most enjoyable things about having a robot. Someone to listen to me, someone who asks the right questions, someone who cares if I'm unhappy. I sighed the other day, and the robot whirred to life and rolled over to me. "Are you feeling unloved?" It bleeped. I was shocked that it knew. "Would," it said, "you like to dance?" A metal rod shot out of the silver canister with a glove like a Mickey Mouse hand. I touched the rubbery appendage and gave it a squeeze. From his internal speaker, a tinny waltz started to play. That's the scene that my husband walked into. Me, waltzing with the robot in the kitchen. "What the hell?" he said. I barked a laugh and put my hand over my face. "This robot is amazing," I gushed. I sighed, and he asked me to dance. The program it's running is incredible. It's so sensitive. My husband frowned. He didn't like new things. The robot retracted the Mickey Mouse hand, and 2 balloons popped out at the top of the metal chamber and filled with water. The protuberances dipped together near the center of the metal canister. "Hey, big boy," beeped the robot. "Want to spend a little time with me?" My husband first looked appalled, but then delighted. I hadn't understood how involved the robot's programming was. My husband approached the robot, smiling. His hand reached out. "Don't you dare squeeze the robot's balloons." "Why not?" he said. "You were dancing with it." "That's not the same thing at all, and you know it." The robot's eye sensor moved from him to me, and the balloons deflated, sucking back into an invisible aluminum opening. The sharp sound of a baby crying came from the same speaker that had been playing the waltz. "There," I said. "You've made the robot cry. Are you proud of yourself?" "I didn't do anything," my husband said, and walked out the kitchen door mumbling. The crying stopped, and the eye sensor turned towards me. "It's okay," I said. "We're a difficult bunch." The metal chamber that made up most of his body slid down to the wheels, making a kind of scraping sigh. "I'm sorry," beeped the robot. "Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you." Thank you. I'm also reading a short work in progress. It's called Red Underpants. "It's the year of the wood dragon," said Maddie. "It's key that you get red underpants." "Why is that?" I don't even know why I was asking, because I always do whatever Maddie tells me to do. It had been that way for 30 years. "It's going to be a rough year." "Oh, awesome." "No, I mean, it's going to be a wild ride, maybe in a good way, and the red underpants will protect you and bring you good luck." I wrote on the magnetic pad on the refrigerator, "Buy red underpants." Maddie is my best friend, and honestly, her phone calls have saved me since Quince was born. Maddie lives 3,000 miles away in Seattle. We lived together in college. But then I moved to New England and got married to a conservative old Yankee who sails, while she joined and then dropped out of an ashram in Mendocino. She got married, had 2 kids, and divorced immediately, so she's way ahead of me in the parenting game. Her kids are 10 years older than my Quince. If she told me to buy red underpants, I was totally doing it. I hung up the phone and drove to Target. It was Valentine's Day, so there were plenty of red underpants to be had, although my husband says it's not manly to call them underpants. The term is underwear, or better yet, boxers, he said. Right, boxers, very manly. Well played, menfolk, naming their underpants after the most testosterone-fueled sport there is. I guess tennis shorts didn't have quite the same ring. In any case, I got red boxers for my husband, red boy shorts in the women's section for my teenager Quince, and red underpants for me. None of those ridiculous thong underwear either. I do not understand women who wear thongs. It's like dental floss for your bottom. Ridiculous. Another revenge strategy of the patriarchy, along with Brazilian wax jobs. The amount of attention that has been focused on the shape that women's pubic hair should be shaved into is another issue for me. There is nothing more dehumanizing than the phrase I heard at the hairdresser, the landing strip. In any case, I bought fabulous, huge red bikini-style underpants for me and red boy shorts for Quince, who likes to wear boxers, but just can't because boxers don't hold maxi pads in place. It's one of the 1,000 indignities a trans boy must face, getting your period while identifying as a boy. Quince's pediatrician recommended an OBGYN in New Bedford to get Depo-Provera, a shot that would be administered every 2 months to stop Quince's periods. "The OBGYN is trans, so there's that too," said Dr. Gupta. "Which way?" I said. "Male to female or female to male?" Dr. Annabelle Feldstein, a trans woman. "Oh, that's too bad. I wish it were the other way around." I drove Quince to see Dr. Feldstein. A tall, awkward woman entered the room. She turned her back to me and addressed Quince. "Are you interested in hormone treatments?" she asked, and my hands flew up. "Hey, we are here about Depo-Provera, not hormones." Quince was only 17. I didn't want to introduce testosterone into the mix until much further down the road. He had been diagnosed with autism level 1 at 16. We were trying to manage anxiety, depression, and finishing high school. Quince doesn't want to even consider hormones until he's 25 because of the growth of the frontal cortex, I said. But Quince interrupted. "That's what you and Dad want. I want hormones as fast as I can get them." Dr. Feldstein turned her back to me to listen to Quince. "I'm not a gatekeeper here," she said. If you can get a note from your therapist and show that you've had body dysmorphia for over 2 years, I'll get you hormone treatment. I kept silent and let them have their conversation while seething inside. Medication rarely worked on Quince the way it did on neurotypical people. Advil barely touched his pain. In the car, I asked Quince about what he'd said. I do want testosterone, Mom, he said. And then, hey, if you say testosterone like an Italian chef, it sounds like an Italian dish. I'd like a side of macaroni and testosterone. I pulled out of the parking spot. Yes, but we are dealing with so much right now. Don't you think we should wait until you're 25 when you're more grown up? Silence. Quince couldn't drive yet, and I didn't see him starting a conversation with his therapist and getting a note for the OBGYN. He was going to have to mature a lot before he could navigate all the steps. Unless I initiated, I did not see testosterone being on the menu anytime soon. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ms. Linder, and one of the things I love about working with Leslie is she helps generate ideas, and I've been playing with ideas in my writing, mostly ideas that have to do with social media and photography. I'm going to read an excerpt from a piece that is in this volume, and then a working project in motion, I would say. Okay. For longer than I care to admit, I've adored you, identified with you, but recent shifts in your nature make it impossible to continue. As in many long-term intimate relationships, we're in a battle for control. When we were first together, I felt a sense of discovery, even power over the unfolding universe. To capture a fraction of a second in a frame, no less, stop my beating heart. Freeze time, share vision, now that's a superpower. My cape was a scrappy square scarf, donning that in the rubber soles of 20th century boots, stacked in support of exploration, flexibility, and maybe with a little platform, more perspective. In the beginning, there was the word, and for me there was also the image. The image, you see, was supposed to tell stories, to hold so many words, certainly not a word count capped at 1,000. As an introverted extrovert, making and sharing images was an elevated way to relate, to make a statement. You might say we clicked. We made it small big time, or big small time, depending on the audience. We made a name for ourselves. As time went on, we got attention. Eyeballs, my father used to say. We captured eyeballs. It struck me that was an uncomfortable way of stating it until I heard the same thing in agency speak, this idea of capturing eyeballs. I like capturing eyeballs, as it turns out. At its core, there's a little look at me, but then diverted to look at this, look at this. This helped share moments across community, friends, family, colleagues, and then the media. On the heels of all this, clients. Oh yeah, you helped me build a life full of great food, shelter, fashion, travel, adventures, loyal companions. You brought me friends, music. You fed me, kept me well heeled. We traveled the city, the state, the country, the world. Together we had a great sense of humor. What I didn't expect, but in retrospect there were signs, there always are, is how you would flip. I could count the ways and focus on what brought us here. To start, losing the physical aspect of our relationship, from analog to digital, all in the blink of a decade or so. And now you're practically unrelatable, always buried in your smartphone, in the artifice of AI. But let's cut to the chase now. You see me through the eyes of others and with cool judgment too. In fact, you go beyond watching. You judge and practically stalk me, tracking every movement in a manner eerie in its detachment. It seems I lost control of our relationship. Not that control is the goal, but if we want a future, it's time to face the moment and find a way through. Snap. So, kind of jumping off of that, I've been writing, I've been posting pictures online. I was doing it once a day for about 3 years, and then I just stopped because I thought, I'm taking this offline. So, sometimes I'm online, I can't guarantee when. I'm calling it hashtag ruminations, but maybe I'm not gonna so much say the hashtags. Like, think about a silent hashtag. Like, when you want to hear a hashtag, just put it in there. So, pick up a hashtag book. A book is not a smart object. A book does not track nor trace your swipe. A book doesn't listen, watch, or perceive. Start an analog book. This book will not record your voice, chart your moves, or follow your eyes. No hashtag click to enter. You're free to choose your own adventure. And, I'm having trouble starting this, so I've started a few times. This page is intentionally left blank. We'll probably, here we go again. Analog, you're holding a book. It is a square. I'm envisioning my book, see. 12 by 12 and the cover is a photograph. The photograph is a screenshot with a graphic cropping mechanism that frames the white expanse. From the bottom, the silhouette of a bent hand reaches toward a title statement, "You are not connected to the internet." Portal, phone in hand, walking into another dimension. The shadow self, curious, tempted by the apple, biblical component to the digital world. Too much knowledge yields chaos and mind still forming. Babel is a language app built to connect continents, but as we approach the center of the mystery, we will learn who the center can hold. This is one of my favorites. You can't really see it that well because it's actually a color image, but it's like the hand of God touching the end of a plane. Encounter. I did a TED Talk on perspective that is languishing on our server. Shift your perspective and you can shift the world. It's a mighty power, and this is where the humors were conceived. Couple more. Pro. Does the camera capture a soul? I used to scoff at the idea. Now it's clear that runaway souls are shattered and scattered throughout the metaverse. This is one way to avoid the paparazzi. The point. What are you looking at? I asked myself when scrolling through the endless stream of post-humanity residue. How and where would you look if you knew the machine is capturing every eyeball movement? Sometimes I take pictures when I'm on Zoom of like the Zoom watching me. Let's see. Okay, all right. Hack, another breach announced this morning. The device betrays me through the adjacent company that clouds the data. No names have been compromised, says the conservative newspaper, which streams through the same portal where paper no longer exists. And this is, by the way, the third hack that I have had. Like your data, you get those notices in the mail. Your data has been, sorry, compromised, oh well. Do some other things to help yourself and make it happen. All right. Beasts. My mother is becoming a shell of herself. My hashtag mother's mother became a shell of herself. 3 is not a charm. My sister and I need to stay the memory care course. Let's see. Breach, another day, another notice. Printed, sealed, and sent. Now collecting, using as wallpaper, almost like a prize in the mail if you play the game right. And finally, I'll leave you with this. Hashtag, the pages turn into a path. The musings soothe the soul. The hashtags form a trail that turns into a rabbit hole. That's it.
Hi, I'm Leslie Brilliant. First of all, I want to give a big round of applause to these writers. It takes a lot of bravery to put your work on the page and then read it in the audience where you don't know everybody. So I'm very grateful to all of them for participating. I'm going to read 2 short pieces. This is called Ghost Story, and the companion to it is actually in our first volume, which I just realized today. Ghost Story. It was the ghost of the thing that intrigued her the most. The sense that at any moment she would wake up, fully remember every detail of every moment, only to find that none of it was real. Or at least no more real than a dream is real. So real, but only to her. The husband, the children, the family vacations, the petty fights, their circle of friends, their house, their dog, their lovemaking when they were young, well before kids. Their snoring fitful sleep now that they were middle-aged and rounder. All of it could be a figment of her imagination. The feeling that this was nothing more than a ghost life was increasing. It had started a couple of years earlier, right around the time Bill's mother died. When she thought about Bill's mother, she was filled with resentment that she'd been the one who had just spent 3 weeks cleaning out their family house because Bill was in the middle of a big deal at work, one of the many that never materialized into much of anything. It wasn't her family house, but the subtext was clear. Her time was less valuable than his. The rage she felt at this perceived slight was so strong she could hardly think of Bill's mother in any other context. They hadn't been close, but she'd been fine as far as mother-in-laws go. That neutrality had now been ruined. Over the last few months, the ghost feeling was more intense. In fact, she was becoming certain that none of this was actually real. Sometimes she would fantasize about the moment of waking up and then the moment of realization. She would vacillate between it being incredibly sad and an enormous relief. Maybe in her real life she was still in her 20s, plenty of time for a do-over. She worried that the specter of the dream life might affect her real life, but put that aside. She could marry better, someone taller, more hair, or certainly more money. She could do a better job mothering. She could play Mozart for her floating embryos and be more patient as they struggled at their piano or violin lessons. She would get them into the right preschool, make sure they had the best tutors, went to the best colleges. In this ghost world, it was too fucking late for any of that. She'd try to comfort herself. She'd wonder if Stephen weren't this Stephen, but a better Stephen, if she'd miss his goofy smile, or how gentle and patient Sally was with the dog, even if it was a Sally who could understand geometry. She doubted it. Those better kids would have their own unique qualities, the kind she could brag about to her friends, and these kids, they would be mere specters. The ghostliness of it bothered her only in the sense that she couldn't talk about it to anyone. They'd think she was having a breakdown or early onset Alzheimer's like her great Aunt Adelaide. It wasn't that though. In fact, it felt like the opposite. Every detail of her life with Bill was suddenly so sharp and clear that she could block out none of it. Their dating life had hardly been a courtship. He seemed to think she was fine enough and the relationship kept moving forward through her sheer force of will. While she couldn't remember why she continued to make the effort, she could remember every time he didn't call her after they'd spent the night together. The missing Valentine's Day gifts years 1, 3, and 7. And then there was the botched 30th birthday. Stephen was almost 3 and Sally was an infant. She didn't need a big party or cake or anything, but a few hours to herself would have been nice. To his credit, Bill never screwed up a birthday that badly again, but still. She could feel the disappointment rising as she thought about the absence of anything, even a card. He'd said happy birthday, but it felt like an afterthought, less important than where are my keys or can you pick up my dry cleaning. She probably should have left him then, but the thought of packing up the kids and putting them in the car was too exhausting, so she'd stayed. It had not occurred to her that she could actually leave without them. But she didn't speak to Bill for 2 full weeks after that, although she did still pick up the dry cleaning, which now that she thought about it, she wished she hadn't. It was that sharpness that made her certain that none of it was real. The few times she'd really thought she'd had enough and called her mother, she'd been assured that it would fade. The bad feeling, the anger, the disappointment, all of it would fade, her mother promised. You won't remember any of this when you get to be my age. You'll just be glad to have someone to take care of you. And then her mother would launch into how glad she was that she'd stayed in her marriage despite the drinking and the neglect and the other women. But it always felt more like her mother was trying to convince herself that she'd done the right thing rather than assert that she had. If she woke up, these parents wouldn't be real either. Not this sister or these cousins or aunts and uncles. They'd all be the ghosts, and the real ones would be better, she'd hoped. More like characters in a Jane Austen novel and less like characters in a David Mamet play, sad and lost. But then Austen might not be real. If this was all a ghostly dream, then Austen and Mamet might be inventions of her imagination. How wonderful to think that she may have actually written both Pride and Prejudice and Glengarry Glen Ross. And every movie she'd ever seen and every piece of music she'd ever heard, Brahms and the Ramones and the Beatles. It made her smile to realize her own creative genius. The only worry was how much she'd remember when she woke up, but because it was impossible to memorize all of it, she'd just have to hope for the best. She'd certainly remember that movie, the one where the mathematician is bonkers and his job as a spy, time spent with his best friend, his love for his goddaughter, none of them are real. But they are so much more interesting than his actual boring life as a boring mathematician. A beautiful mind indeed. She'd likely come up with that story as a way to deal with this extended ghostly dream life she was living. In the last few weeks, Bill's chewing had become a trigger. He'd always had an aggressive manner when it came to eating, as if he were actually counting to 100 with each mouthful of food, like the 1970s Weight Watchers guide had suggested, as a way to reduce intake. She had to turn on the television while they ate, or the volume and persistence of his chewing would provoke her to want to bash his head with a frying pan. Like what she'd always hoped would happen during a Honeymooners episode, but sadly never did. Every time she heard that chewing, it was like the urge to wake up was somehow dampened, and she stayed in this dream of Bill and their mediocre suburban house, their mediocre suburban kids, and her mediocre suburban parents. That's how she'd come up with that Talking Heads song. This for sure was not her life. Calling it beautiful was irony. Some days she'd actively try to wake herself, pinching her forearm and willing her eyes to open. Other days, especially when the drudgery of dirty underwear and meatloaf and dog hair got to be too much, she'd bask in the relief that none of this, not one bit, was real. It was an odd kind of dream that felt like it went on entirely too long, but she knew that when she woke up, it would only be a night, maybe even less, that had passed. She could get on with it and start living her real life. And now for something entirely different. This is called Notes to My 9-Year-Old Self, and if you get the book, there's a picture. There are things I wish I could tell that 9-year-old girl. She's the one wearing what look like aviator sunglasses, but are really thick plastic lenses with tinted covers clipped on top. A compromise after I begged my parents to spring for the thinner lenses that turned into sunglasses in the sunlight to make my nerdy glasses a little less horrifying. They were too expensive, especially since they'd already caved to my begging to go to 4 weeks of sleepaway camp that summer. It seemed like all the girls in my class were going, and I didn't want to miss out, despite the guilt of the cost and my general terror that I would be out of place there, ignored there, miserable there. I want to tell her not to worry so much about what other people think of her, how other people treat her. I want to tell her that her energy is better spent on how she treats herself. I want to tell her that popularity is fleeting, and groups and outgroups are short-lived. I want to tell her that intelligence will someday be sexy. Lean into your braininess, I want to say. You're smart and creative too. Stop turning yourself inside out to try to make people accept you. They won't, and what's worse, you won't accept you either. I want to tell her that drinking all the sweet, sticky Shabbat wine at Friday night dinner at camp won't make her seem cool. It will only make her sick and nearly get her kicked out. Desperation to be liked is palpable, I want to tell her. Be yourself instead. I want to tell her that her dreaminess is a delightful quality, that she should not hide and squash her imagination. I want to say that reality always catches you. Don't be in such a hurry to grasp it. Live in the clouds as long as you can. I want to tell her that everyone has bodily functions and it's okay to pee in the woods. I really wish I had told her that before the night of sleeping bags and tents far from bathrooms. It would have avoided later disaster and humiliation. I want to tell her that she'll find her athleticism in a dance studio one day. She is not dumpy and awkward. She just isn't made for team sports. One day her work ethic and passion will make her a favorite of teachers and choreographers. Limitations and imperfections are surmountable. I want to tell her that when some of these girls in the picture stop being friends with her as they search for their own social ascendancy, it's going to be okay. Actually, it will be better than okay. The time in the social wilderness will be temporary. You'll find your people, I want to reassure her. I want to tell her the time it takes to blow dry her curly hair straight is better spent. Stop asking for the Dorothy Hamill or the Farrah Fawcett or the Christy McNichol, I want to shout. Get a style that suits your bouncing red curls. I know you think they make you look childish, but someday you'll lose all your hair to chemotherapy. After that, the color and texture will never be quite the same. And then one day it will start to gray. You'll miss those auburn curls, I would tell her. I want to tell her the time spent being envious of girls who are taller, thinner, stronger, have straighter hair, better eyesight, better bodies. Girls who capture the attention of 9-year-old boys. That's time she will never get back. I want to tell her that she doesn't need boys to like her right now or anytime soon. Even though it feels like she does, I want to promise her that someday the attention of 9-year-old boys will be relegated to the ridiculous. Like yourself, I want to say. I want to tell that girl to stop wasting time hating her nose, her freckles, her thighs, her hair, her smile, her personality. I want to tell her that her only real flaw is the cruelty she points at herself. I want to grab her by the shoulders. You'll never get that time back, and then you'll spend even more years trying to undo the damage, I would tell her. It would be so much easier to love yourself, I would say with tears in my eyes. Please love yourself, I would implore her. I want to tell her there's a reason for the feelings of dread she has, the constant worry and discomfort she's feeling at home, at school, at camp, the free-floating, seemingly causeless sadness and fear that keeps her from smiling, silences her laughter. You'll know the root in just a few years, I want to tell her, and while it won't make life easier right away, it will be illuminating and allow you to protect yourself and do better for your children. You won't be a perfect parent, far from it, but one day you will create the real, authentic closeness you craved. I found a picture of myself when I was 9, and I look so cool, I tell my daughter over the phone while texting her the picture. As the words are coming out of my mouth, I almost can't believe I said them. My memory is of being the most awkward, uncool kid on the planet I had, but the picture says otherwise. My daughter agrees and asks if we would have been friends or if I would have been too cool for her. Absolutely we would have been friends, I say, remembering the feeling that I was too cool for nobody. For sure, I assure her. She is my doppelganger, this daughter, deep red curly hair she's trained to create perfect waves, blue-green eyes, my grandmother's nose, my father's mouth. We used to joke that my genes won, but she is different from me in her confidence, her self-love, her satisfaction with who she is. I look at that unsmiling 9-year-old in the photo, and I want to tell her that when she looks back nearly a half-century later, she will see something other than what she felt that day. I want to look her in the eyes and assure her that she is, in fact, cool. And then I want to tell her that none of that really matters because one day she will be something so much better. Someday she will be happy. So thank you so much for coming to our reading. We're happy to answer questions if anybody has questions about pieces, the process, how this is our Volume 2. Volume 1 is also here. There will be a Volume 3, and hopefully you're reading about a year from now. So would love to open it up to any questions for any of us. Yes?
I'm actually interested in the process. I have no idea how it works when you come together.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about that, and then maybe some of the writers want to talk. So all of these writers have been in regular classes with me. I do online writing classes. We meet once a week. We do in-person retreats, and we do a 5-day retreat where we're all together. That Wendy's been a part of, and everybody here has been a part of. And it's really about, there is some instruction and some suggestions, and what happens is people just start getting in the practice of writing, and then they get feedback on their work, and they refine it. They come up with new ideas, they experiment with new things in the course of being in a container that's a really, I think, safe space for people to explore. And ultimately, they choose the piece that they want to put, or pieces they want to put in the anthology. We go through a process with that of editing and feedback until they're satisfied with it, and then we put it all together. And so writing, we think of writing as this really solitary pursuit, the image of the writer alone in their office typing away madly. But it's actually many, many writers work in community because you need that feedback, you need that experience. Not to tell you what's wrong with your writing, you actually need the feedback to tell you what's right with your writing. Because we are our own worst critics, and we do not have the capacity to judge our own work. So I guarantee every single one of these people is like, well, this is a piece of crap. When they first wrote it, they are not equipped to judge their own work. You actually need to hear from people, wow, that really drew me in. That really excited me. I want to hear more about that. That was really funny. That was really entertaining. That was really exciting. Because if left to our own devices, our critic will take over and we'll never get there. We'll never get to our genius. We'll always say, I need to be a good writer. but we will never get to our genius writer. And what I love about these writers is they all were able to drop their inner critic in order to find their genius. Anybody else want to speak to process?
Yeah, I was stunned at how writing in a group was so helpful to me. I had been trying to write all by myself, squirreled away in my house, and feeling just so disappointed with myself. And meeting on Zoom and talking about our stories and reading them to each other, and then meeting, all sitting on couches together, it made me realize that it's okay to write in community. Doesn't mean there's something wrong with you, that you need other people around. So I'm very grateful.
Is it hard, at least initially, to comment about somebody else's work?
So we have rules on commenting, and they're based on really what my own experience in writing classes, that what is most helpful to a writer are comments that talk about what drew you in, what you wanted to hear more about, where they might expand. What is really unhelpful is like, I was bored, or the couch should have been red, not blue, or, those kinds of things. And so, people when they enter the class are pretty quiet, usually the first day or two, not always, the first class or two, but once you hear other people comment and kind of start to actively listen to other people's work and you get feedback, you start to understand what is helpful as a writer to expand your work. I mean, would you agree? Yeah, go ahead, Rochelle.
So I think I'm the newest one in this cohort, and when I started and I was in a room, I didn't start with the online, I started in person, and I was in a room with all these brilliant women who had been working with Leslie. It was like, okay, well, this might not work, but I was willing to give it a try. And I will say that there's so much generosity, there's so much inspiration from other writers. I think that Leslie doesn't give you specific assignments, but what she does is she teaches you some fundamental ways of thinking about your writing that weren't for me anything I really knew about. Like how to make what she calls image moment, like a rich feeling of giving the reader the sense that they're in that moment. What did it smell like? What did it look like? What did it feel like? She guides you to a way of thinking about what you want to express that enriches what you write. And I'm unbelievably grateful and unbelievably inspired by the other women that I've been able to write with. And really, she's kind of a genius in a very understated and thoughtful way.
Thank you, Rochelle. I really appreciate it. I would just add, again, there's sort of this image that you can't write in community because you'll end up plagiarizing each other, right? There's this, I've had people say to me, I remember somebody and I were both working on articles on a situation we both experienced from different places, and she's like, I can't read yours because then it will taint mine. And I don't think that's actually true. I actually think the inspiration that people take from each other, when your ear hears the imagery, hears what it means to pause the action or dialogue and create tension, hears what it means to create an iceberg where you don't quite know what's under the water. When you hear it in other writers, it actually empowers you to put it in your own writing in your own unique way. And so this idea that we have to be closed off, I think it's the opposite. We actually have to open ourselves to hearing great writing, hearing new work, hearing what works in somebody else, hearing what lit you up about somebody else's writing. I guarantee it will make your writing better. And that's the kind of space that we write in, is where we are lit up by one another's work. Aaron.
So I'm wondering, I really love the pieces here. I'm wondering if anyone would like to report on a moment of shift, perspective on your own writing through this process that was particularly meaningful funny or heartfelt, grief-driven? I'll take whatever you got.
I would like to answer that, Laurel. So I started working with Leslie a long time ago, actually, and one of the reasons I came to her class is because I grew up in South Burlington, Vermont, and I had a high school English teacher who had critiqued some of my work, and he said, you know, good writers are born and not made. And if you don't write like Hemingway, you're not a good writer. And he actually said that to me, and for a long time, I was like, really felt very shut down and defeated about even trying again. And I always had this idea in my mind that like good creative writing was like, it had to be like Hemingway or it was bad. And I ended up, when I went to Leslie and I told her that, I was like, I'm not really sure I'm a very good writer. This is what my high school English teacher said. And she was like, that's the biggest bunch of bullshit I've ever heard. And I felt like that transformed, it didn't happen right away. I would say that like there was, I remember the first time I ever wrote something and read it aloud in the class, I felt really anxious about being judged by other people. And what I really like about Leslie's process is that it's not that she offers feedback that is really intended to see the positive in the work and how you can push it further rather than like what's wrong with it. I always felt very seen, and like the way that she offered feedback and the other people in the class was actually very helpful. And so it made me change the way I looked at writing, because I always had this idea there's a good and a bad, and it was very binary. So I don't know if that helps.
You're leaving out the best part of the story. Laurel now makes her living as a writer.
That's right.
She forgot that part.
It's true. Different kind of writing though. We're like
But-
copywriting, but
But it's also all comes from the same creative space.
yeah. Thank you. Other people may have different answers to that question.
Anybody else got a shift moment? I'm not looking at you, Liz. Sorry.
Karina?
I actually was just noticing that Rochelle here had like such a total breakthrough today. We were writing earlier, and Rochelle writes often a lot of memoir pieces that are very beautiful, and all of a sudden, bam, she was writing this incredible fiction, like she started a novel today that just blew the socks off of me. We've been writing together for over a year, and so it's just watching everybody bloom and blossom, it's incredible.
First of all, thank you, Karina. I want to say one of the things that made that happen for me, not that it was intentional, but Leslie said, write in a form that you don't usually write. And she said, you know, maybe you want to write science fiction, or, you know, she threw out a bunch of different things. And I realized that a few times since I've been working with her, she suggested fiction. And I remember that when I tried fiction in the past, I actually really had a good time, and I was able to just play with it more. And that's what I did today. And I had no idea what was going to come. And it was, and to Leslie's point, I thought, it's okay. And then the response from everybody in the room was actually that it was more than okay. So it's a constant opportunity to surprise yourself.
Yeah, I
To do
mean,
this work.
I think, you know, for me, when I was studying with teachers, and I had a lot of those teachers who were like, this is bad, this is good, this is how writing works, this is how you do it. And then I studied with a guy named Jack Rapes, who is a poet and a playwright, and love Jack. His classes were amazing, and he created this thing called method writing that I use a lot of. But the revelation, the shift for me was that I didn't have to know what I was gonna write about in order to write. I didn't have to come in with a great story to tell. I got it all mapped out. You know, we have that myth, right? The J.K. Rowling myth. She had all of Harry Potter mapped out, all 7 books. And so what does that tell you if you don't have the 7 books mapped out? It's like, well, am I gonna be able to do this? And the idea I could sit down with a blank page and just enjoy writing and that I didn't have to know where it was gonna go, that the place was gonna find me. And so I try and really instill that in everybody else, like, you don't have to know where you're going. The place will find you. I guarantee it. It will find you. Well, yes.
So how do you start if you don't know where you're going?
You know, when people first come to me, I give them ways to start. And then they start to just integrate that into what they're doing. It's sort of, I used to do a lot more like week 1 is this, week 2 is that, week 3. And I've learned over time that you need a little bit and then you just need to like, let them run, right? And so people just, they find their stories. And every once in a while, I'll give them something to shake it up. But people find their stories and they find their voice. And I think that's the part of it for me is watching people find their voice and then share it in their own unique way.
I can add something to that, which is, and a little touches on this other question about like what, where does something shift? Because of the exercises and the prompts and the repetition and listening to other writers and seeing, somebody maybe read that feels uncomfortable and thinking, well, why are they uncomfortable? That's fantastic. You can sort of, the sort of reflections start bouncing around in a different way. And Leslie has these techniques that really do kind of bring you into a deeper voice. And once you've gone through some exercises, you start getting more traction, and it's kind of fun, I feel more, I would say I at some point realized like, I feel more confident with words. Just putting words down on a page, generally speaking. That's it. It just, I don't feel so second guessing anymore. And I couldn't tell you when it happened.
I think it's also, for me, it's about helping people find the joy in writing, because I think we all grew up writing in school. It's kind of tedious and treacherous in some ways, and then there's, again, the image of the depressed writer, the broke, depressed writer, like all of those things, but it's actually, even when you're writing something that is dark or difficult, there's joy in the creativity. And so finding the joy in the creativity changes your relationship to the content. And that was, for me, also a big revelation. Like, I could write about something that was really painful and then be like, oh, that was fun. And it takes experiences and observations and turns them into fuel for creativity, which changes your relationship to those experiences and observations. And there's something kind of magical about that. So thank you all for coming. There are books available, volumes 1 and 2. Happy to sign them if you like, but really grateful to everybody for coming.